Hello everyone, my name is Daniel Backer and this is my son. Are you fucking kidding me, dude? Hello everyone, my name is Daniel Backer and Pringle, my son, will probably be turned into a hat at some point in the near future if he doesn't play his cards right. But I've decided that I'm going to try to do more of these weekly updates on my channel because I've gotten busier with the new job that I got here in New York that I'll tell you all about here in a minute. And so the longer edited videos will still be on the way, but I can tell you what I'm doing in the meantime. And today I'm going to share a couple readings from The House of Mirth, which is the new book that has really captured my attention. And I'm also going to do a quick reading of my book that I just put out. But yeah, I started working at an all-girls middle school on the Lower East Side, which has been really challenging, but also really interesting. And I think that for as exhausting as it is, it's been the job that's been most closely aligned with my interest because I get to teach them about writing and about how to formulate their ideas, and that has been really satisfying. And it's really cool to see the way that they think about pieces of text evidence and how it relates to a broader theme. And I'm seeing, and it makes sense for their age, that a lot of them are having trouble differentiating between like big abstract concepts and pieces of evidence that show those concepts. And that's something that I think about all the time. Kind of from like a philosophy standpoint, of like Plato's Platonic ideals and forms to Aristotle's taxonomy of like detailed objects within the world and how those interplay throughout philosophy, but then also just creatively about how you set out on a creative project with a big idea in mind, and you ultimately have to try to put that big idea into small pieces of evidence, whether it's like a piece of music when you're translating this melody in your head to something that somebody would actually want to listen to, or within like a book, of coming up with this kind of abstract impression of what you want the reader to feel, and then understanding that you need to put it into scenes and prose and summary. And so I'm having a lot of fun doing this, even though a lot of these girls just completely tear me apart and say that my outfit looks absolutely terrible, and they're not wrong. I have never been a very fashionable person, but I'm working on it, and I like to think that they're looking out for me and not just trying to insult me to my face. But I am going to start out my readings today with a longer reading from The House of Mirth. I really like that I have 3 novels of hers in this big old collection, because I first read the last one, The Age of Innocence, and absolutely loved it. It was my first book by Edith Wharton, and it really emotionally affected me. And I mentioned in the last update that I did that it was really refreshing to just have this character-driven plot and to have this payoff at the end that just like really punched me in the gut. But then now I'm reading The House of Mirth, and it has like a completely different experience, but it's cool that they're both contained in the same binding. And so I anticipate to read The Custom of the Country maybe right after, because I'm really enjoying Edith Wharton right now, so I might as well just wring as much water out of that rag as I can. But it's been really interesting to see also how, even though these stories are character-driven, how she uses characters to develop plot points. And so that's something that I'm hoping to emulate for the next big fiction project that I work on. That sometimes we think of character-driven stuff as not being as plot-based because it's not as much about them achieving one singular goal and overcoming 3 obstacles in like a Hollywood 3-act structure. But really, a lot of the way that the characters functions is as obstacles to the main character, or as like a foil in order to highlight different attributes as a contrast to the main character. And so I think that just in addition to me enjoying how insightful Edith Wharton's writing is, it's provided me a good pathway to see how to make a more character-driven narrative still have some structure and some backbone, because as much as I love the trippy postmodern stuff that tears you into all these different directions, it is really satisfying to have... One of my commenters mentioned that it's like a tension and release structure, and my goal is to try to take a lot of postmodern imagery and trippy, fun stuff, but give it that tension and release structure so that it still makes you muse on philosophical concepts, but then there's a satisfying arc and a good payoff at the end. But that is enough rambling about that. I'm going to read just a couple passages from the House of Mirth that I have enjoyed. Yeah, so this first one is after Lily Bart's father is financially ruined, and we see the pretty brutal way that his wife reacts and the way that Lily feels like a spectator. Your father is not well. He doesn't know what he is saying. It is nothing, but you'd better go upstairs. And don't talk to the servants, she added. Lily obeyed. She always obeyed when her mother spoke in that voice. She had not been deceived by Mrs. Bart's words. She knew at once that they were ruined. In the dark hours which followed, that awful fact overshadowed even her father's slow and difficult dying. To his wife, he no longer counted. He had become extinct when he ceased to fulfill his purpose, and she sat at his side with the provisional air of a traveler who waits for a belated train to start. Lily's feelings were softer. She pitied him in a frightened, ineffectual way, but the fact that he was for the most part unconscious, and that his attention, when she stole into the room, drifted away from her after a moment, made him even more of a stranger than in the nursery days when he had never come home till after dark. She seemed always to have seen him through a blur, first of sleepiness, then of distance and indifference, and now the fog had thickened till he was almost indistinguishable. If she could have performed any little services for him, or have exchanged with him a few of those affecting words which an extensive perusal of fiction had led her to connect with such occasions, the filial instinct might have stirred in her. But her pity, finding no active expression, remained in a state of spectatorship, overshadowed by her mother's grim, unflagging resentment. Every look and act of Mrs. Bart's seemed to say, "You are sorry for him now, but you will feel differently when you see what he has done to us." It was a relief to Lily when her father died. Wow. So, poor Mr. Bart. That is a bummer. And I think that a lot of the interpretation here is pretty much on the surface, specifically in the line that to his wife he no longer counted. Damn. So, like, really the only thing that he meant to this family was that of the breadwinner, and once he was financially ruined, his wife was like just waiting on a belated train for him to get out of there. And in addition to this being really sad for all the parties involved, this is very foundational to Lily's character and her central goal and tension within the story of trying to find a husband, trying to find not just love, but someone that can provide for her the lifestyle that her mother taught her to lead, which is to live with the appearance of wealth and with all of the niceties of wealth, but without a lot of the substance behind it. It's just a really fascinating piece of background for her character and extremely well written. But this next character description is of Mrs. Peniston, which is Lily's aunt that she stays with. And Lily is kind of like a burden because she hasn't been married yet. She's 29, and the family kind of passes her around to take care of her. She ends up staying with Mrs. Peniston, who doesn't really participate in life. She just kind of observes everything and follows the customs of being rich. She had always been a looker-on at life, and her mind resembled one of those little mirrors which her Dutch ancestors were accustomed to affix to their upper windows, so that from the depths of an impenetrable domesticity they might see what was happening in the street. What a cool way to describe that. I love that part at the end. She had always been a looker-on at life, and her mind resembled one of those little mirrors which her Dutch ancestors were accustomed to affix to their upper windows, so that from the depths of an impenetrable domesticity they might see what was happening in the street. It really shows how removed she is from everyone, how she's looking down on everyone, so we get this note of condescension, and that she is a lot more concerned with just blending in, not participating, and passively enjoying her privilege. And so her life is just like a little mirror, so she can peek to see what's going on in the world that she doesn't participate in. Love it. And this is the last one that I'm going to read from the House of Mirth here today. And I really like this one because this shows Lily Bart's attraction to Lawrence Selden. And for all of the judgment that she puts on this kind of upper crust class of people in New York, it seems like Lawrence Selden escapes from this in some way, and this is what makes Lily Bart attracted to him. Miss Bart was a keen reader of her own heart, and she saw that her sudden preoccupation with Selden was due to the fact that his presence shed a new light on her surroundings. Not that he was notably brilliant or exceptional. In his own profession, he was surpassed by more than one man who had bored Lily through many a weary dinner. It was rather that he had preserved a certain social detachment, a happy air of viewing the show objectively, of having points of contact outside the great gilt cage in which they were all huddled for the mob to gape at. How alluring the world outside the cage appeared to Lily, as she heard its door clang on her. In reality, as she knew, the door never clanged. It stood always open, but most of the captives were like flies in a bottle, and having once flown in, could never regain their freedom. It was Selden's distinction that he had never forgotten the way out. So cool. It really shows how people end up getting trapped by this sense of expectation and adherence to social custom. But I really like that line that it says, in reality, as she knew, the door never clanged. So like you don't have to do this if you want to, but just because something is socially entrenched doesn't mean that it's easy to disobey. All of the weight of expectation and desire that Lily has for a high-class, rich life make her feel bound and trapped to that, even though she knows if she wanted to, she could stand outside of it like Lawrence Selden does. And that actually is what makes Selden attractive. And this is what makes Lily such a complex character, is that she ends up loving Lawrence Selden for his ability to not conform to those social customs and those expectations, but she, in spite of that attraction to him, still feels drawn to these other people that she doesn't feel any emotional connection to, just so that she can attain that life that she feels that she should have, that her mother told her was the way to live. So I have heard that in spite of the title, this is going to end very sadly, and the way that Age of Innocence ended, that is not surprising to me. I'm going to do a very brief reading from my novel right now, if you haven't had enough of my voice yet today. This is from a pretty dramatic scene near the end in chapter 18, after Lionel, the protagonist, has imbibed a brew that makes him leave his body. Oh, Pringle's here for it. Lionel's form integrated into a glint of oil, spread thin on the surface of a murky puddle of water, almost hidden by the white Rolls-Royce parked above. His outline distended in the arrhythmic drip of oil into the puddle, and swirling puffs of particulate road dirt were disquieted beneath the roiling concentric ripples. He humbled himself to exist as the rising steam from the pot next to Constance and condensed onto the outside of the kitchen window. A gentle air current blew him over the house and the cliffs down to the shore below. He was grated within grains of sand, emulsified into the fibers of paper trash, ingrained into the wood of a picnic table, and surged within the hum of a streetlight. A soft wind from the ocean bore against him, and he laced himself into its gusts, flutter-kicking through water vapor. He rollicked within a plume of smoke and followed it down into a fire pit. Wafting in the swirl of char detritus, Lionel cooed in pleasure, but he froze at not hearing himself. He tried to speak, but he was silent. Becoming the fire's tongues, he mouthed a cry and sent sparks around him. He cowered low in the cinders to an almost reverent submission as the realization of his present state took hold. He was an entity entirely dependent on things outside of himself, objects in the world, and only their appearances at that, contingent on light, horizons, peripheries, and penumbra. There were innumerable embodiments in the immensity of the world around him, and to all of it he relinquished his power. So, that is from Lionel Lancet and The Right Vibe, available now. If you made it to this point in the video and you can't afford the price, reach out to me and we can organize something, because I'd rather have you have the book. I'm not trying to get rich.